At the end of my speech, I was a bit alarmed, listening to the Minister of Finance, to the President of the Bank of Hungary. I could have been alarmed, but I heard what I have never heard before, the expression that it is a patient bank policy. I have not heard it yet. I am thinking about what this means from a creditor's point of view, but we are probably not going to discuss this now, but rather in the talks following the conference. Before I start my speech, I would like to say 3 things. The first is the location. We are in a good place. Few people know this, but I would like to tell you that there are more cultural and economic events than sports events in this institution. This is a good sign that we are in a good place. But if you look at it from a political point of view, you can see that such economic development steps as the construction of this stadium are worthwhile. One does not like to acknowledge one's mistakes. One is just put together, but here, unfortunately, I have to acknowledge a mistake. Considering the number of visitors, it should have been built a little bigger. Before I start my speech, I would like to ask the President of the European Union, to help me with the translation. The state is not capable of taking the EU regulations in a considerable measure. Such expectations should not be opposed to us. I try to support such expectations through my colleagues, the bureaucrats, but I am unsuccessful, and I have to see that this remains the case. Anyone whose job it is to deal with the translation of the EU regulations has only one point of view. The sooner, the better. I cannot give him a contraindication, because then he does not know what his job is and why he is getting paid. So, the faster and deeper translation of the EU regulations that should be done by someone else. This is only possible if there is another person who is interested in the reasonable translation. If they do not support us, you, the decision-makers, then the logic that wants to translate as quickly and as thoroughly as possible does not seem to be reasonable. So I ask for your help, Mr. President, to support us in the other direction, so that there is another approach that we decide on in terms of the depth of the EU regulations. And finally, Mr. President, I would like to close my speech by calling on Kuskas's brother to play nice attacking football. I would like to report on the appearance of one of the candidates for the parliamentary election when Janos Laszlovis, our fellow member of the team, the setup of the team at the parliamentary meeting against the British. I look at the setup and everyone is fighting. I say, Janos, who will defend here? Janos. So if they want to imagine the 25th year, the Hungarian government's intention, then this is how we should imagine the year ahead of us. As for my speech, I would like to thank you for the invitation, Mr. President. After the new leadership of the chamber, the most important question that I need to discuss is what the relationship between the government and the Hungarian parliament was like. Before the 10th election in 2010, we signed the first significant agreement between the later ruling party and the then Hungarian parliamentary world. At that time, Voss was still in the center, and Sándor Demian brought that agreement to the top. Before the election, the routine counts a lot. The agreement has 5 points. We obviously agreed on a podium that we would fulfill our 5 promises, and that the companies would support the government and the ruling party. We fulfilled 4 of the 5 points. The first point was that we would reduce the company's revenue to a regional level within 4 years. This was much higher before the 10th election. Today, in the EU, we have the lowest corporate tax rate and the 3rd lowest ECI. So, as the Minister of Finance would say, it is a pipe dream. The second agreement was that we would launch state budget and judicial programs. The speakers mentioned other things as well. We also appointed Sandor Demian for a large program on the Széchenyi card and the government's information behind it. The Minister of Finance mentioned this earlier. Our third agreement was that we would create 1 million new jobs within 10 years. This was still a matter of public disclosure. I did not laugh at it because of Sandor Demian. It was a matter of public disclosure. No one believed that this would be possible, and we all saw that it did happen. Finally, our fourth agreement was that 50% would go to small and medium-sized companies. I can count on the average of the past 5 years. In the past 5 years, 51% of the EU money went to KKV. So out of 5, 4 did, 1 did not. Of course, it would have been better if all 5 had been fulfilled, but we must be honest and examine which of the 5 fulfilled better. We promised that we would fulfill 5 out of 5 points, and that you would support us. I think that if 4 out of 5 companies support us, then we are quits. I believe that this is not the case yet. We will return later to the 5th point. Ladies and gentlemen, the second phase is tied to the name of President Laszlo Parag. We signed agreements. These were the following. The growth of Hungarian economy should be above the EU average. The investment rate should be above 25%. 1 or 2 years have already passed, and we can forgive the delay. In essence, it has already happened. Unemployment should be below 4%. We agree on that. The government should have a policy of exploitation and should support the export of goods. We can say that since 2010, our export of goods has doubled. This can be seen as a success. I can always only praise the successful Hungarian companies for the benefits they enjoy in the support of the government. They will go abroad and prove themselves there. If someone is competitive abroad, they will be happy at home because they are competitive and have good performance. For this reason, I strongly encourage everyone who would like to work with the government to go abroad and prove their competitiveness there. This will also provide us with political support. Our 6th agreement with Parag Laszlo was that there should be a significant corporate tax reduction. Since 2010, the tax rate has decreased by 6%. I believe that we have kept our agreements in line. What will happen to the new leadership? From what I have said, it is clear that we would not have achieved the conditions that we have agreed on with each other. We are ready for this. This was also mentioned at the previous meeting of the current conference, where I understood what the Prime Minister asked of us. This was also discussed here. The tone was not exactly the same. In the closed circle, he allowed for a more comprehensive approach. The Prime Minister demands simplification and a reduction in bureaucracy. In the case of tax reduction, he sees one form of taxation as simplification. I believe that we can agree on this. I would like to point out that the Hungarian government is ready to join the agreement with the new leadership of the chamber, as we did with the previous ones. The agreements should be made from a clear point of view. We should set a time limit for this. I suggest that by 1st July we agree on the things that we will soon agree on, and that this agreement includes simplification and a reduction in bureaucracy. Ladies and gentlemen, what I can tell you about the future of Hungarian economic policy is that its philosophical foundations and the most important elements will not change. So we have to expect economic strategic direction from the point of view of what you have seen in the past 15 years. We are the government of tax reduction, and we will remain so. There are all kinds of rankings that help the international assessment of tax systems. Among developed countries, we have the 7th most competitive tax system in the ranking of the Tax Foundation. It is fair to say that we are not the first. This is what we have to work on. You could see in the latest reports, especially in the subsidies of the SIA under the long-term tax system, that the government has essentially introduced an element in the tax system that determines the tax system. We cannot jump out of this. We will have a tax system with a threefold combination as its foundation. The tax system must be used for work, for families and children, and must be implemented with low tax payments and with tax incentives. Work, family, and tax are combined in this solution. We are introducing this now. We have already started with family tax incentives, but with the introduction of the long-term tax incentive, the structure of the tax system will not be changeable, because it is no longer possible to take away the long-term tax incentive from those who have already seen the policy and know that this is the case. In the long term, this is what the tax system should be designed for. The second thing, which is important in terms of predictability, is that job creation will be the most important thing. We do not want to go back to the socialist direction. We do not want to bring back a social, basic, aid-based economic system. We are thinking of a job-based system. We want to promote and recognize and appreciate, so job creation will continue to be one of our most important goals. I do not agree with those who say that the Hungarian workforce has disappeared in Hungary. According to our analysis, there are still approximately 300,000 Hungarian citizens who can get a job. Of course, this requires training, a more evenly distributed economic policy, and much more. But we still have at least 300,000 confidants who seem to want to work, but have not yet found the opportunity. The third pillar of the economic policy that will continue in the next period is the support of companies. The previous Minister of Economy referred to the impact of communication in the future, but he only referred to the fact that the 320 billion forints would be enough for all of us. For example, the lifelong safety of the three mothers would be equivalent to 150 billion forints per year. With Szécheny's card, we would give the companies 320 billion forints. I would just like to point out that this is a very clear, serious political decision by a government party to divide this amount according to its social and left-wing approach, or rather, to give it to companies to support the 320 billion forints so that they can operate the economy. This is a matter of choice. I am convinced that if we do not appreciate and recognize, if we do not support them, if we do not make it clear that they operate the economy and not the state machinery and not politics, if we do not make this clear, then the efficiency and economic strength of the country will begin to decline. Therefore, the government will continue to support the companies and value the work of Hungarian companies. How true is this? There are 3 years of war behind us, and compared to the last year before the war in 2001, in the 3 years of war we have pumped in 400 billion forints to support small and medium-sized companies in the economy. We plan to pump in more than 1,730 billion forints to Hungarian companies through small and medium-sized enterprises. This is almost a 50% increase. This is a 50% increase. Similarly, the government's policies may also include the adoption of investments. There is a technological change. More experienced people have spoken about this before me. I would just like to emphasize that we cannot be successful if we do not take action with the technological change that is taking place in the world. This is more than digitization. But it is more than that. This is one of the reasons, beyond other economic considerations, why we cannot abolish the employment of foreign workers in Hungary. We have to bring in those foreign workers who, by the way, help the Hungarian economy. We have to consider many aspects when we give opportunities to foreign companies in Hungary. I will not list them now because this is a question of job creation and regional equality, but in the future one of the most important aspects will be the technological approach. First of all, those foreign workers are welcome because they help the Hungarian economy in the technological change. By the way, compared to the GDP, the foreign workers in the region or in the whole of Europe are the second highest. Only the foreign workers are ahead of us. We have 55% of the total GDP in Hungary. The FDI state is 55%, while the foreign workers are slightly higher, thus we are second. And finally, if the Prime Minister has already spoken about the mysterious patience of the monetary policy, we have to talk about the question of financial responsibility. The Minister of Economy could have said what he said earlier about how long we can be patient. We cannot give up that view, no matter what happens in the world, that after the debt service is calculated, the budget must be balanced. This is the area that the Minister of Economy has. If our primary shortfall is negative, it can cause financial instability in the country, which we cannot allow. So, if we have to understand this thing in patience, that the government should not blink, but understand that there is an area that is available, and above that it is not, then this can be the measure that we have to take into account. I would like to suggest in the matter of responsibility what I almost never see in public discourse. Perhaps you have not even heard of it. In the past 15 years, Hungary has had a government that in every election year has reduced our budget shortfall. Our opponents say they're opponents, but this has no factual basis. So Hungary has had a government that in 2014, 2018, and 2022 has reduced our budget shortfall in every election year. This clearly shows that we are committed to financial responsibility, and I do not want to allow this. If I may, I would like to say a few words about the issue that most of you have already raised here, but it is not without reason that I would like to address it. This is the formation of the international environment, mainly because I have just returned from the kitchen in Boszorkány. In Brussels, in Chuter Talk, this was the topic, and therefore I can perhaps provide you with information to help you, not only in terms of understanding the world, but also in terms of adapting your own calculations. First of all, I would like to repeat that I had good reason to veto the document signed by the other 26 European Union countries on Ukraine and to remove Hungary from it. The document, which of course no one has read, but everyone talks about, is actually about sending even more weapons to Ukraine in the next period and sending even more money from Europe through weapons to Ukraine. Hungary has been fighting for 3 years to be able to survive the war. We have not sent weapons, and we have not sent money to Ukraine for 3 years. Now that the United States is finally in our position, giving up this national position would be more than a mistake. It would be a crime. For 3 years we have been fighting against international attacks so that we do not get involved in the war. We have not sent weapons, and we have not given money only for humanitarian purposes. In the last moments, whatever pressure we may have, it would be a mistake to give it up. Therefore, I ask you to support the Hungarian government so that we can stand by our peaceful position. During the 3 years of the war, the Hungarian economy lost 20 billion euros. This is the loss of the Hungarian national economy. If there is a country that is interested in ending the war as soon as possible, if it is possible by tomorrow morning, if there is a country that is truly interested in this matter, it is Hungary. Losing 20 billion euros in 3 years in the case of such a national economy as Hungary is a very serious loss of blood. We are glad that finally someone other than us. Moreover, our size is significantly exceedingly heavy. The United States says the same as we do. Let us not allow the European siren to say that we should send more weapons and more money, but let us defend ourselves and stay out of this. Those who criticize the government at home because we did not sign this 26-nation agreement are actually saying that we should send more weapons and more money to Ukraine. This is a mistake. Let us not take this position. Let us not get involved in this war. What will happen after the war? This is perhaps the most important question for the international community. First of all, we must not worry about what will happen after the war. Hungary is a member of NATO. Moreover, NATO is the largest military of the United States and Turkey, and Hungary is the most close ally of the two. Those who worry about Hungarian security do not know what they are talking about, because as long as there is NATO and Hungary is in such a close relationship with both the USA and the Turks, we are in the heart of NATO and through NATO, and of course through Hungary's own national army, we are able to guarantee the security of the country. So there will be military security. This fact of uncertainty can be relaxed. In your calculations, in your business calculations, it is not worth making it come true. The other thing that will certainly happen after the war is the strategic alliance between the United States and Hungary. This has already been created, and we are now giving it its economic form. Our foreign minister has just visited Washington. There will be a Hungarian-American economic cooperation package, which will provide significant assistance to the Hungarian economy. This is still good for us if there will be a war of war in the meantime, which of course will also lose all European Union countries. We do not yet know the extent of this, but we can be certain that it will happen. Not only because, as can be read in the economic press, the United States wants to reduce their economic inequalities and disadvantages against the Europeans, to minimize their losses or to put them at an advantage, but also because, as the foreign minister has said, this is the best tool for everyone to understand that it is best to implement investment in the United States because then these companies do not have to pay. This is why large German companies are redesigning their own investments, and instead of their own country, Germany, they are making huge investments in the United States. We need a package with the United States to limit this effect in Hungary or to reduce it. We have the opportunity to do this because we do not have an agreement around double taxation. The previous U.S. government has said this as a crime. We are talking about the re-establishment of this agreement, and there will be other economic elements that will be able to reduce the losses against Europe and Hungary, both monetarily and economically. What else is there? Well, sooner or later there will be a European Union policy as well. The fact that the speakers before me were able to identify the intentions of all world politicians except for the European Union is not accidental. This does not call attention to the limitations of the speakers' capacities, but rather to the situation. I can tell you about this from the first hand, because we talked about this at Chuter Talk. They know that I am not used to this. So it is possible to raise criticisms, but we have to bear in mind that the change that is needed here is a step that has not been taken, for example, in the past 20-30 years. What should the European Union do that is contrary to the logic that has worked so far? and it is not at all certain that it will be able to make this change. When the Minister of Economy tried to prevent this from happening, he used the definition of a developing state. How should the member states of the European Union, instead of a fiscal conservatism, use this definition of a developing state as a basis for their decisions? I think he used this definition. This definition is appropriate to describe the essence of the problem. The essence of the problem is, to put it simply, that the most important rule is that the budget deficit of the member states must be less than 3%. Anyone who deviates from this will be punished according to a well-known sanction system. We can see that our competition partners are not doing this. In fact, we have heard that they have not been doing this for decades. Now is the time when the European Union has to face the consequences of this. Since the strongest state of the Union is Germany, the philosophy of economy of the European Union should be defined by the Germans, if not entirely, but to a decisive extent. The philosophy of economy that prevails in Germany also prevails in the European Union. This is a bit more serious from my point of view because the coalition patterns that operate in Germany are more or less the same as those in Brussels, but this is perhaps less of your problem. The Germans are facing a serious decision. We have been talking about this. I do not know if this is justified, but they are definitely on the verge of making a decision. They will give up the classic German monetary system. The plan that I was able to see in Tutor talk is not to create 500 billion euros as we have seen here, but to create an 800 billion euro German national economic package that will turn 800 billion euros into infrastructure development, whatever that means, and military capabilities development. Let us put aside the political tension. I just wanted to remind you that it is exciting to talk about this, and that Germany will begin to rearm in the middle of this. There will be a German army. It will be the largest in all of Europe. It will be larger than anyone else's. And the industrial base that they want to build will also be larger than anyone else's. We have not seen this since World War II. Will the Americans and the Russians give up this? There is no answer to this yet. We do not know how they will react to this. There is a lot of confusion here. This is a new plan from Germany. The reactions of the third parties to this have only been known superficially. We can certainly say that the Russians do not have the means to prevent this. The Americans do have the means if they want to intervene, primarily through the creation of the dollar-euro trade agreement. Anyway, let us put this aside until we know that the Germans have made a decision, a package of 800 billion euros. This is new money for the economy. This is not money from Brussels, because the numbers in Brussels are never correct. These are lies. Or, how should I put it? These are exaggerations. Because in Brussels they do not say, we put this much money on the table, and it is here. They put a certain amount of money. We do not know exactly how much, which will drive through various financial transactions. This is what they say, but it is not new money. It is a source of money that can be reached through new money, through trust, disclosures, guarantees, and other means. But the Germans are not talking about this. They are talking about real money. 800 billion euros that is on the table. This money can then be used to create trust, disclosures, and other things. So the amount of money that really enters the German economy is not 800 billion euros, but it will be much greater through the multiplier effect of financial instruments. Is it a good thing to rearm Germany and to have a large German army again? Is it a good thing to give up the rule of debt to Germany? They take a huge amount of money out of trust because the 800 billion euros are not enough. They have to take it out of trust and put it on the table, which will then be used for new trusts. Is it good for Germany and for us in the medium term? I cannot tell you. There are opportunities and dangers on the table. Whether it will be good in the short term, I can tell you. In the short term, it will be very, very good. In the short term, it could not be better for the Hungarian economy, because if the correlation that we all know in this room is true, that the Hungarian economy is connected to the German economy in a way that if there is money in the German economy, and if there is an appropriate economic growth and conjuncture in the German economy, through a certain rapid transition system, it will almost immediately appear in the Hungarian economy and increase its performance. Once again, strategically and in the medium term, is it good what happens when the Germans become a sold-out country? I have no answer to that. But the fact that it is good for you, for the entire Hungarian economy, in the short term, I am absolutely certain of that. And they know the Germans. If they do something, they do it seriously. Even if they do good things, even if they do bad things, they do it seriously here as well. I'm only mentioning this because if someone had any reservations about the quality of Hungarian democracy, I would disperse them. Because in order to abolish this tax law, the German parliament has to make a 2/3 decision. As you know, there were elections last week. A series of discussions on the establishment of a government is currently underway with a plan to end meat production, which will somehow have a majority, but not a 2/3. So how will they break the tax break, which can only be achieved by 2/3? So that the recently elected, failed, already non-existent German parliament will be called together for a final session where the current parliament, the government majority of the current outgoing parliament, together with the CDU, will hand over the 2/3, and the German citizens, the already elected parliament, will make a decision on the 2/3. But the tax break will be abolished. This is the situation. This is legal, because according to the German constitution, this is possible. We do not want to meddle in this, but we are lagging behind when it comes to the rule of law and Hungary. This will certainly happen in Germany. The consequence of this, looking at the European Union, is that if my thesis is true, that the German economic philosophy defines the European Union's economic philosophy, then the 3% rule will also be broken by the European Union. So what was the rule that all member states in the European Union could only allow a 3% deficit will also be the past, looking at us. There are probably 2 points that can be identified. One is that the cost of the tax payments must not be added to the 3% to a certain extent. For example, if we spend 2%, the situation will not be so good, but let's take into account the convenience of simplicity. If we do not have to add this 2% to the deficit, then our 3% deficit can increase to 5% if we decide to do so. This is one of the breaking points. The other is that the EU, after huge disputes, which are still ahead of us, wants to adopt huge financial instruments and trusts, and after the German tax, it wants to tax the whole of the EU. The Hungarian constitution does not make it possible for us to support this, nor does it say that for such a trust payment, which is a trust payment outside of the 7-year period, the Hungarian parliament needs to leave 2/3 of the profit. So there are disputes ahead of us in the coming months. If Brussels follows this path and wants to bring the European economy, then what should Hungary be a part of in these programs? We will have to debate this then, and then the EU wants to keep Ukraine alive. This means that the decision was made without our participation, but in a way that is acceptable to us, that at the moment the EU wants to fund 800,000 Ukrainian armies, which the Ukrainian president wants to raise to 1 million after the war, and he has also stated that Ukraine cannot finance a single branch, so the 1 million-strong army must be financed by Europe, because the United States has stated that they are not taking part in this. So the EU currently wants to finance a 1 million-strong army outside of its own territory. Should we finance the Ukrainian state? No, the Ukrainian state cannot finance itself. Everyone remembers that they were at the brink of collapse before the war. So the EU wants to finance the operation of the Ukrainian state. At the same time, it wants to arm itself and wants to use European resources for this. And it wants to compensate the Ukrainians for not taking part in NATO. It wants to take them up to the European Union. There was uncertainty about how to judge a Brussels or a German decision, but I am certain that this Brussels decision will decide the European economy, so this should not happen. Where we have a decisive word is the EU membership. We can exist without the construction of other financial institutions, but not the EU membership. And now that we have formed the framework for the main phase, we must make it clear whether we want to accept these funds or not. This is a serious matter that can determine the fate of Hungary in the medium and long term. It is therefore important that we all know the opinion, including you, so I would like to encourage all members of my trade and industry and their employers to take this seriously and express their opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, the question is whether the Hungarian strategy in this international environment, based on the strategic principles that I first mentioned as the elements of consistency, will bear fruit in the next period. The Hungarian strategy is based on the following thinking. First of all, we must not accept any kind of isolation. In a positive way, this is economic neutrality. It does not matter where the wind blows from or how the waves crash. The Hungarian economy wants the United States, China, the EU, and Russia to have the best possible economic relations. We must not accept any kind of ideological or political restrictions, because we will find ourselves in a situation that we will not find a way out of. It is therefore good to provide ourselves with the best possible movement area and to establish the most reasonable possible relations with everyone. This means that we must not find ourselves in a situation in which the European Union maneuvers itself. Today, the European Union is an isolated player in the world economy. It is in a war, or at least in a serious political dispute with the United States of America. It has just accepted a document that it has created against the American Peace Initiative and has accepted an open conflict with the United States in the matter of war. It has isolated itself from China because it is the EU's initiator of taxes and tariffs, i.e. a conflict with China. And it has isolated itself from Russia due to the war with sanctions, especially energy sanctions. Today, the EU is an isolated entity. It has a conflict with America, China, and Russia. They are isolated. Hungary is not a part of this. We have the best possible relations with the USA, Russia, and China. So, if we are talking about isolation, then it is true for the EU, but not for Hungary. The second element of the Hungarian strategy for the next period is peace. I have spoken about this repeatedly. We cannot afford another 3 years that will result in a loss of 20 billion euros to the Hungarian economy. So we need peace. The third element is tax cuts. I have spoken about this before. For a longer period of time, we are now cementing the Hungarian tax system that combines family, work, and tax cuts. The next pillar of the strategy is the Demian Sandor program. I asked the Chamber to help us to bring it to an end. We have worked out the framework, but as I said, the government does not operate the economy. Not even the Minister of Economy, I am sorry, but not even the Prime Minister of the Hungarian Bank. I am more sorry, but not even the Prime Minister. Actually, the businessmen operate the economy and the business people operate it. Despite the fact that we have been promoting the Demian Sandor program, if you do not help us to make it as simple as possible for the business people, we ask you to participate in this. Finally, the EU funds will come. They are coming now. The EU agricultural funds are coming, and the EU cohesion resources are coming. They will come in the next period as well. There are those points at which we will have to fight for the invitation of a new branch or a new group. But we know these points, we know when they will come in time, and we know who is in the negotiating position. So we will be able to reach all of the European Union sources, just as we are today, because European Union sources continue to arrive today, both cohesion-based and as a result of European agrarian common policy. All in all, I can tell you that this is the situation. This is our own strategy. This is the year of breaking through, as we believe. They have heard, they have seen, and you know best. There is a lot of money in the Hungarian economy. There is a lot of money in the companies. There is a lot of money in the households. And there are huge credit capacities in the banks. The task is to move this money this year and to put it in the service of economic growth and productivity in a reasonable way. This is possible because we have the right people, we have the programs, and I hope that you have selected leaders who can help us to simplify the process of economic growth. All in all, I would like to add one more thing, and I am not going to bore you, just so you can see that I am not talking about the air when I am talking about a lot of money. Currently, there are 4,682 state investments in Hungary. The value of this is 12,500 billion forints. There are 2,949 projects under construction. The value of this is nearly 6,000 billion forints. There are 1,733 projects under development. There are 13 high-rise construction projects. There are 10 major road developments under construction. The value of this is 1,270 billion forints. I am not talking about the development of the Budapest-Belgrade Railway, but the value of this is 754 billion forints under construction of 29 projects. It is worth noting that we are not going to talk about the development of Budapest because the economic weight of Budapest is decisive from a national point of view. I must also add that I cannot keep up with the previous figures. Budapest accounts for 167% of EU development. Huge investments are taking place in the city even now. I will mention a few. For example, the railway infrastructure in the south of Budapest. The Pázmány Péter University is worth several hundred billion forints. The renovation of the city of Buda. I will just mention a few. There are major development programs in Budapest, but we cannot launch any new ones in Budapest due to the reasons mentioned here. Based on the available resources for development, we have to focus mainly on regional objectives, and we have to move towards the closure of the region. These are huge numbers. I expect that, as the eastern part of the country has succeeded in setting up an industrially innovative, powerful, and dynamic track, which will soon reach the most developed regions in the west of the country, we will be able to do the same work. We have the biggest problems in the southern regions of the country, both beyond the Danube and underground. We will focus these development resources there, and the strategy I have shown you here will not only be implemented, but will be implemented in a fair way for the country. Mr. Irvin, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me here today. I would also like to thank you for arranging this meeting. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we would like to be able to implement something by July. The year-round, the half-year round, will take place in the policy of government and budget. If you would like to achieve something this year, you will have to come to an agreement a few months before July, so that we will be able to implement it by the deadline set for the July legislation. The government is 100% committed to simplifying taxes, reducing taxes, and reducing bureaucracy. Thank you for listening. Thank you.